What's up guys, Brad here. In this video, I'll walk you through how to use REW in the sub distance setting in your receiver to take your bass from this to this. Sound good? Then let's go. So one of the great things that I absolutely love about home theater is that there are often multiple ways to achieve the same thing. Now, I previously did a video on how to use a mini DSP and REW's alignment tool to figure out the best crossovers for your room, and also how to add delay to your subwoofers to make sure they are properly aligned or in sync with your main speakers, which will help you get the smoothest transition from your subwoofer to your speakers. Now, that's definitely one of the easiest ways to make sure you get the best response you can at your crossover point, and the mini DSP is a great tool, but it is an expensive piece of equipment that not everyone can fork out the dough for, and that is totally understandable. However, if you have a mini DSP, I'd highly suggest going with the method I used in that video, which you can watch by following the card above. But the great thing is you can actually get excellent response at your crossover point by making sure your subwoofer is aligned with your mains, all by using settings built into your receiver. You don't necessarily need a mini DSP to do that, though it can make things easier and allow you more flexibility and tweaking potential, as you may also be limited by how far your receiver will let you make distance adjustments to your subs, which can honestly limit this technique a little bit. But for the most part, any receiver will allow you to make the adjustments necessary to get better and smoother response at and near your crossover point, which will honestly make your listening experience that much better. Now, the only items you'll need to try this out for yourself are access to a measurement microphone like the UMic 1 or the Dayton Audio UMM6, a laptop or computer running REW or Room EQ Wizard, and a little bit of patience and time. It's a pretty straightforward process, but I'll be breaking it down so you won't have too much guesswork to do. Before we dive into REW and get started, if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and ringing the bell icon so you don't miss out on any new uploads. I'll also have links to the measurement microphones I mentioned previously in the description below, along with other calibration tools I think are worth considering, and a full list with links to my home theater setup. These are affiliate links which do help support the channel at no cost to you when you use them. Also, I will be using an SVS PB1000 Pro subwoofer in this video, which SVS did provide for review purposes. Look for that review video soon. Alright, enough talking, let's hop into Room EQ Wizard and get started. Alright, so we're in REW here, and I'll just run through my setup real quick. So under Preferences, and then Preferences again, I have Java set here. Output device, I have Denon AVR selected. Input device, I have the UMic 1. I want to go over to the Cal Files tab real quick and just make sure that I have my 90-degree file loaded. The 90-degree file is loaded because that's how I have the mic set up, and it's just pointed straight up at the ceiling, just how I do basically all of my measurements at my main listening position. Now, I do want to add that you are going to want to do any type of EQ to your speakers and subwoofer before we start this process. So that could be using the built-in EQ function in the receiver itself, or using the SVS app, for instance, to EQ your subwoofer. You're going to want to do that beforehand. Same with running any type of room correction. So Odyssey, YPAO, Direct Live. We want to do that beforehand. Let it do its thing. It's going to set pretty much all the trim levels and everything for you. And it's also going to set up distances and stuff too, and crossovers. So speaking of crossovers, I'll pop into my receiver settings real quick and show you how I have it set up. I have Odyssey turned on reference, dynamic EQ is turned off, and dynamic volume is turned off. You want those turned off as well. You don't want those interfering with what we're doing here. And we'll also go in and make sure that our crossovers are set. A normal thing that a lot of people do is they'll go in here after Odyssey is done and they'll make sure their crossovers are set. I've just set all these to 80, just like kind of a normal setup. And then distances, just let Odyssey do its thing. Set the subwoofer to 12.7. We want to make note of that, and we want to make sure that we remember that baseline of what it is. So now we're almost ready to take a measurement. So we'll go back to REW here, and we want to make sure that the volume is loud enough to take an accurate measurement. Click on Generator, Noise, Pink Random, and Speaker Cal. We want this set to -12 dBFS, and then we'll just make sure the output that's selected is just for the left channel. Then I'll also bring up the SPL meter, and for the settings here, just make sure this reads SPL, set to C weighting, and is set to slow. I'm gonna hit the play icon here, and then I'm gonna adjust the overall volume on the remote until the SPL reads 75 dB. All right, so now the level's set there, we're ready to take that measurement. So we'll click on measure here. I've just labeled this base measure, which is fine. For the range, we want 10 to 250 hertz selected. We're not really concerned with anything higher than that. For the level, again, minus 12 dBFS is fine. For the length, just make sure this is set to 256. You can go 512. That's just gonna make it take basically twice as long. And then for the output, we want this set to L plus R, so left plus right channel. The reason we want to do that is we want to see how the sub is playing with both the mains at the same time. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure this says base measure, and I'm going to put 12.7 at the end because that was the distance that Odyssey set. I'm going to hit start. We'll let that measurement do its thing. Okay, and then I'm gonna make sure that all SPL is selected here. So let's take a look at this real quick because it's kind of interesting, right? So Odyssey corrected all of this stuff. So it's relatively flat down here, looking good, kind of, you know, okay. No room's perfect, no speaker's perfect, we know that. But look at this. So we set our crossover to 80 hertz and we got this massive null here. We're getting around 84 dB here. Remember, we're playing both the L plus R at the same time, so we have a little extra output there, which is normal. We got this dip, so it goes from about 84-ish all the way down to 68, so almost a 20 decibel difference. That's pretty massive, and that's gonna be audible to your ears. It's gonna really impact how smooth that transition is from your front speakers to your sub and vice versa. You're gonna notice a drop or decrease in certain areas, especially right here around the crossover. So right at 70 hertz, right at 80 hertz, we have these dips here. We don't want that. So this is with distance at 12.7. So there's a couple ways to do this. I've found the easiest way is to just add a foot, take a measurement, add another foot, take a measurement, do that 3 or 4 times, see what you get. And then we'll also do it the opposite way. Now, yeah, this does take a little time and we could use the alignment tool, but I've quite frankly not had good luck using the alignment tool with this process. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into my receiver and I'm gonna change this to 13.7, click on set. If you are on a Denon or Marantz receiver and you're going in and adjusting the distance, set it and then back out one menu. Otherwise, you're gonna take a measurement and it's not gonna change. It doesn't update until you back out of the menu. Just a little tip for you there. All right, so we've set that to 13.7. We'll click on measurement again. I'll label this 80, 13.7. Remember, the one before was 80, 12.7, and we'll click on start to see what we get. All right, so the purple one here is slightly better in some aspects, not so much in others. We have this area here, which is elevated, but then this area here, we're starting to create more of a null. So what we can do is try 14.7. We'll go back to this and we'll just label this. We can double click on the end here and highlight that whole thing. Just change that real quick, makes it super easy. 80 hertz, 14.7 on the distance. We'll see what we get. So if we turn off 13.7 real quick, I'll highlight this. Again, around here, this is actually better than the 13.7 one, but we're starting to create this null again up here. That might mean that we're going the wrong way. We might need to take some distance off instead of adding distance. So let's go ahead and give that a shot here. All right, so I set that to 11.7. So I'll go ahead and change that here. So if we go ahead and take a look here, we don't have much of a change, honestly. So I say let's try 10.7. Normally when I'm doing this process like this, I will go 3 or 4 feet one way and then 3 or 4 feet with another. It doesn't take very long once you kind of get into the swing of things. It gives you 8 measurements or so to look at and decide, okay, which one is which one is better, which one do I like more. So I changed that to 10.7. So we'll click on measure again, change that to 10.7 and click start. Okay, so interesting, right? If we untick that one and we look here, not much of a change from 12.7 to 11.7, but if we go down to 10.7, all right, we're going somewhere. We lost a little bit here. You know, for the most part, it's looking better. So let's keep going with that. 9.7, all right, we'll go back here. And you always wanna make sure these are labeled so you can keep track of what's what. So if I'll just turn off the base measure here. If we compare 10.7 and 9.7, you can see 9.7, we got a little more output there. So I might wanna go one more and see how that compares. So we'll do that real quick. So we set it to 8.7. Go ahead and label that 8.7 as well. So if we take a look here, 8.7 kind of better in some aspects again, and we're starting to lose output here. Say you get this and you're happy with it. Cool, you can set it at that, give it a listen, see how you like it. But say you're not happy with that. Say you can't get this to look flat how you want it. Like you can't get a smooth response. What can you do then? Well, chances are, depending on your room, your crossover might be set too low. I know, it's kind of sacrilege to set your crossover above 80, right? I would ask that you give it a shot. In my room, I have to set it around 100 Hertz to get the best, flattest response at the crossover point. So it's super smooth. You can't tell that it's crossover at 100. Voices aren't coming through the subwoofer or anything like that. You really don't get that localization until you hit 120 Hertz and above that. Just keep that in mind. Don't be afraid to raise that crossover to fix issues here, especially at the crossover point. You're actually probably robbing yourself of a bit of performance and smooth transitions from your mains to your subwoofers. If you're like me, you're trying to get this as smooth as possible and you just can't do it with your crossover set to 80 Hertz, start bumping it up by 1 and doing the same process again. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go in, because I know that 110 Hertz for this room is what I need to set it at. I'm gonna set this back to 12.7 though, go over my crossovers here. I'm gonna change these to 110 Hertz. Now for you, I would change it to 90 or at least 10 Hertz higher and see what you get. And if you're still not happy with that, go up another one. You can work yourself up to 120 if you want to, or you could stop at 100 and be like, you know what, I'm not going any higher. So I have that set to 110. I have it set back to 12.7. So I'm gonna label this 100, 12.7. Okay, so already, if we look at the response here, especially compared to what it was before, just by raising that up to 110, why did I put 100? I'll just relabel that. We can already see a massive improvement, and that is without adjusting anything. So we could potentially get even better response by adding distance or taking distance away. So let's do that real quick. All right, so I'm gonna go back to my receiver settings under my distances, and I'm gonna add another foot. So I'm gonna go to 13.7. We'll go back to REW. We'll label this 110, 13.7. All right, so if we look here, this blue line, this is the one with 13.7 feet instead of 12.7. We've got this little dip here, and this kind of looks relatively the same, not too much of a difference. We've got this little dip up here as well. But basically what I'm gonna do here is, I'm not gonna bore you by doing these measurements over and over again. I think you probably get it by now. You've seen me take 6 or 7. I'm gonna go ahead and do those off camera. I'll do up to 4 or 5 feet going up, and then 4 or 5 feet going down. Come back and we'll look at all the measurements, pick the best one, and then we'll talk about what we can do after to make sure that the crossovers on all of our other speakers are set correctly as well. All right, so I did quite a lot of measurements. As you can imagine, I kind of went a little overboard. But anyway, so let's go ahead and start with the bass here, which is 12.7 feet for the subwoofer at 110 Hertz crossover. Like I said, already a much better looking measurement than the one at 80 Hertz at 12.7 or basically anything else that we could find at 80 Hertz. So if we start looking at the ones where I took distance away, 11.7 starting to look identical. This is a blue line here. So we started gaining a little output here, lost some here. Not really anything drastic. If we go down to 10.7, we started losing output here a little bit and gaining it here, and then we started creating this massive null here, which is something we don't really want. Going down to 9.7, again, we're starting to create some funkiness here, not really looking too hot, and then down to 8.7, not good at all. Like, we got this really funky thing going. We lost a little output here, gained a little here. Again, nothing that I would consider to pick over 12.7. So at this point, 12.7 is our best bet, right? So let's see what happened when I started adding a foot. Going from 12.7 to 13.7. Like I said before, we gained a little output here, lost some here, looking weird. So if we go to 14.7, lost even more output here. We're creating this null, really funky. Go to 15.7. Whoa, definitely not anywhere near where we want to be, and it's actually way worse. But we'll go to 16.7, and we still have this up here. Yeah, I mean, this is identical down here, which is good, which is what we want. But what we want to see is we want to see a little more output here and not these massive nulls. We want it to at least be the same for the most part, but better in the areas that have the nulls, right? So then something interesting happens when we go from 16.7 to 17.7. Wow, all of that stuff pretty much evens out. And we got the purple one here is 16.7. I'll uncheck that again. The red here is 17.7. So we've kind of kept this null here, but everything else is starting to look better. So then I went a little further and I started adding 0.1 instead of a whole foot. So I went from 17.7 to 17.8, 17.9. I basically added about 0.3 or 0.4 to the overall distance. So I went from like 17.7 to 18.1. And what I found was 18 gave me the best overall response. So if we compare that to 17.7, it's slightly different. We got a little output up here, the green line being 18. This null remained the same, which I'm not too concerned about there. But if we compare it to 12.7, we could see that while it's not massively different, overall, it is a much flatter response and a much smoother response than 12.7. We get relatively the same volume throughout the whole range here, and our crossover is awesome. This is up here is well above our crossover here. This is something to do with my front speaker or front speakers. This is excellent, and I would be perfectly happy with this. All right, so I've settled on 18 feet. It's gonna be different for yours. What we need to do now is we need to make sure that this also plays nicely with every single speaker in our system. That means the left, center, right surround, left surround. Can't do Atmos because REW doesn't do that. But we can go and make sure that we get the smoothest response there through each one of our speakers by making sure that the crossover is set properly there. So let's go ahead and run through that real quick. To make sure that all of our other speakers are playing nicely with our new settings, I went ahead and started a new REW file here because the old one was just getting a little cluttered, and I wanted to keep things pretty well organized for the most part. So what I want to do first is everything is still set the same as it was before. The volume never changed on the receiver. We ended up with 110 Hertz. And what I want to do is I just want to do a base measurement L plus R. This is just gonna be for reference. We could import from the other one, but it's just easier to take a measurement. So I just labeled this L plus R. Okay, so we have our base measurement here. Now what I wanna do is for this, you will need ASIO for all. So under preferences again, I'll select ASIO. I will choose my device, ASIO for all V2, and then for output, I'll choose output 1. That's going to be my front left. For input, I have the UMIC 1 selected, and then under Cal files, we just want to make sure that ASIO for all V2 has our 90-degree file selected and loaded up. So perfect, we're good to go there. We don't need to do anything else. So now we'll just click on measure. I'll label this left and make sure that the output here is the output 1. We'll see what we get here. Okay, so our overall volume output is decreased, which is fine. It's around 75 dB, 76 dB for the sub because I have it running just a little bit hot. This actually looks really good. Got, you know, a little null there, a little null there, a little null here that wasn't in this other one, but overall, very, very good response. So let's move on and do the right channel. We want to select output 2, that'll be the right. Okay, so again, I'll untick the left here. Not looking too bad. We got a little funky null here, and then this up here again, this is gonna be a lot to do with our front right channel and the placement of it. But compared to this, yeah, the volume's decreased, which is obvious, but looking pretty good here. The left and right look okay to me. They're perfectly serviceable here, and they're gonna sound great, I'm sure. So now we need to check out our center channels and our surround channels. If we go back to our crossovers real quick here, we'll see that I still have 80 Hertz set for the center and surround. So basically what I wanna do here is I wanna do a measurement at 80, see what we get, see what our frequency response is. And then if we need to raise the crossover, we'll do that. Typically what happens is you'll end up raising the crossover to what you set your front speakers to. So in this case, I set it to 110 Hertz. We're probably gonna end up setting it to 100, 110, something like that to get the smoothest response. That's just how I've found it to go in my system at least. I'm gonna go ahead and click on measure. I'll label this center 80, and then I will select the output under output 3. Okay, so as expected, we got some nulls here that don't look right. So let's go ahead and raise that crossover. So raise it to 90. All right, already we're starting to get a little bit of that back there. I'll raise it up to 100, and I'll label this center 100. All right, so we'll untick 90 here. 100's already starting to look better. Go to 110, label that 110 here. Okay, so again, not super perfect, but better than what we started with, and 80 Hertz there. And we'll go ahead and do 120 just for the heck of it. Probably will be slightly better, but I tend to like to match my front crossovers at least. But again, that's personal preference. We'll see what we get here with 120. All right, so nothing too vastly different. It's honestly to the point that I would go back and be perfectly fine setting it at 110 and leaving it there. So we can go ahead and just say we're gonna tick with 110 here. And then basically we're gonna do the same on the right surround. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that off camera. So I'm not gonna have you sit here and watch me do that process again. I would do the left surround, but I have a bunch of equipment here. Not really gonna be, you know, too beneficial because there's sound being blocked by the laptop and the lights and everything. So I'll be right back and we'll go over those. All right, so I've done all those measurements here. So I did one at 80, 90, 100, 110, and 120. So let's run through those real quick. By default, right surround at 80 has some weird funky nulls here and here and here. By going up to 90, we can see that we start losing those nulls. This one's still kind of an issue here. Let's move up to 100, which is the green one here. And as you can see, we start getting rid of those nulls. We still have this one up here. Again, that's a speaker issue because this is well above the crossover point here. Going from 100 to 110, and you could see we definitely are getting a much flatter response. And then 120, you know, it's not too different. Again, this is going to be that kind of personal preference, use your judgment thing. Do you want to cross over your right surround at the same that you do your fronts and your center? Completely up to you, but it's not that much of a difference in this instance anyway. So I'd probably leave it at 110. So after you do the right surround and get everything squared away there, you pick your crossover, make sure it's set in your receiver, and then you'd also want to go and do a measurement of the left surround, or if you started with your left surround, after you pick the best crossover and get the best response, you also want to do a measurement at the right surround because you're setting the overall crossover for both of them, not individually. So you want to make sure that the right surround isn't getting too weird, and you might need to do a couple measurements there and go, okay, you know what, crossing over at 120 gets me the best response at both, so that's what I'm going to do. All right, so after all of that is said and done, it's finally time to listen to your system, and hopefully it sounds a lot better than it did before. It might not be immediately noticeable, but give it, you know, a couple days and you should start to notice that, oh wow, the transitions from the subwoofers to the mains or the center and everything is much smoother than it was before. I don't feel like I'm missing anything. And remember, the front speakers in particular are like the anchors of your whole system, the left, right, and especially the center. I mean, the center is where the majority of sound comes from in a movie. Definitely worth a try to go through this process, and I think it's totally worth the time and effort you put into it. So as you saw and hopefully experienced for yourself if you followed along, making those small adjustments had a major impact on how our sub blends in with our main speakers. The nulls were basically corrected, resulting in a much smoother transition at the crossover point, which means we aren't missing out on any bass in that area, and the sounds that go from our main speakers to our sub should be seamless. And like I mentioned, sometimes raising your crossover a bit can make a huge difference, especially if you're struggling with getting a smooth response by adjusting the subwoofer distance. A lot of it has to do with your room and not necessarily your system. So, you know, don't think anything is wrong if you have to raise your crossovers. You're simply just optimizing the sound for your room and your space, and you have measurements to go off of instead of just wildly guessing, which is always a good thing. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, feel free to give it a thumbs up as it helps this video reach more people. Also, if you followed along and tried this process for yourself, leave a comment and let me know how it went. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.